Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And now that Labour have unveiled their plan to deal with the upcoming energy crisis, which has both a cost and supply factor, I'll go through the various aspects and consider the political pros and cons. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'll have to see if I can get through this. It's got very hot again. I usually record first thing in the morning when it's cool, but unfortunately this is like a breaking news thing. But before I go into the details, what I'd like to do is I would like to lay out what I've said in streams and what I've said in past videos, what I sort of expect of an opposition plan. Because remember, that's what Labour are, an opposition. What an opposition plan to deal with this imminent crisis is, because a lot of people seem to get muddled. They think, oh, what's needed is a plan to deal with the crisis. No, they have no power to deal with the crisis. That's for the Conservatives. This plan of Labour's is not a plan to deal with the imminent energy crisis. It may well do that. It'd be lovely if it did. You know, if that sounds silly, just remember, they're not in government. Also, they're not going to be in government for a few years at least. It's not like there's an election coming up, unless something mad happens. There's no way that this plan could ever be put into practice, come what may. When they do finally form a government, the circumstances will also be very different to now. Yes, they're still going to need an energy policy, but it won't be this one. There may be some features in common, but we'll be in a very different place. Whether it's better or worse, you can guess. So what is even the point of Labour coming up with a plan at all? Well, it's politics, to win power. Labour have to demonstrate two things to target voters if they want to form the next government. One, that the Conservatives are failing in government. This is not at all difficult because both the current Prime Minister and both of the candidates to become the next Prime Minister have openly said as much. In fact, Labour have now got a huge store of the way in which all of the senior members of the Conservative government, the current one and the next one, have all trashed the Conservatives' legacy in power. But second, they also have to demonstrate that Labour are fit for government. And it's the second one which requires the government in waiting to always have comprehensive, fully costed plans to deal with all of the major issues of the day that the current government are not dealing with, even though they'll never be implemented. In addition, because the Conservatives seem to have all lost all sense now that Labour have produced their plan weeks before the Conservatives even intend to, if the new Prime Minister elects to adopt any of the measures in Labour's plan, Starmer will point out that the new Tory leadership is adopting Labour policies just like the previous one did. Starmer will further point out that if Labour were in government, these obvious decisions would be made much more quickly and unnecessary suffering could be avoided. And this is why the plan needed to be comprehensive. It's not enough to be a plan that would actually work. In fact, it actually hardly matters whether it would work or not, because it will never be tested. What matters is that it contains measures that will appeal to target voters and, crucially, that the Tories might adopt later. I've said before, the Tories have allowed Labour to present a plan to the nation before they did. I think that's mind-blowingly stupid. The other thing the plan needs to do, in my view, is not just deal with the immediate problem of the rise in energy costs, but tackle long-term energy security. The last Labour government were expanding renewables to the point where we'd now be 1 or 2 years away from not being at all reliant on foreign supplies of fossil or nuclear fuels. Scotland carried on these policies and they're already in that position. Yes, it's much easier for Scotland, but nonetheless it was a continuation of those policies. The whole of the UK would have been there had the Tories not been allowed to halt the plans. So the Labour plan needs to tackle long-term measures which could be carried forward into manifesto promises for the next election. So anyway, enough of what I think the plan needs to do. What does it actually do? Well, most of the immediate interest to people is that it doesn't allow energy prices to go up any higher than they are now. It's not just that it doesn't go up the extra amount, it doesn't even go up the amount that was forecast last spring. Now, the government can't just tell energy companies not to put prices up if there's no business model for doing so. You know, they can absolutely tell them to curtail their profits, but not to offer the service at a loss. So there would need to be compensation for the energy companies to do this. That means public money from taxation. Labour's plan is to extend the tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. Basically what a lot of people have been calling for. You know, squeeze profits, not the budgets of hardworking people who are already struggling with the cost of living. Labour have pointed out that the benefit of doing this in this way is that they also prevent inflation getting out of control. And that's actually really important. In theory, the government could allow the energy cost to go up. They could still tax the oil companies more. They could use the money to give households the direct payments, handouts as Liz Truss calls it, to pay the higher bills. And the net effect in many cases is sort of the same. But the problem is that that would cause inflation to get to the point where you could be worried about a run on the pound. Because that's where we are now. We're into that seriously dangerous territory. This is partly what knackered the Labour government in the late 70s. You cannot imagine that the Conservatives want to repeat the experience. The Labour plan still means raising more tax on profits, still means helping people afford the bills, but it stops those bills going up and feeding what is already the highest inflation in the G7. Labour are also pointing out that because the prices wouldn't rise at all this October, they'd save on the interest for the debt payments, because the Tories were planning on piling on debt in order to fund their own plans, to let these companies carry on making massive profits, basically. That's what they've been doing while they've been in power, piling on the national debt. Not for long-term gain, not to build an infrastructure which we can use to grow the economy and then pay off the debt later on. No, just to allow already wealthy people to make more profit. In terms of longer-term moves, it is more limited. Labour's plan talks about insulating homes. Now, this is something they've called for before. It's not a new plan. Obviously, in terms of managing the problem for the future, there are two things that would help. First, not being reliant on unstable sources of energy. Like I said before, if we continued our move towards renewables, we would almost be in that position now. Knackered political relations don't stop us getting the wind, do they? You'd have thought the Tories, a party of blowhards, would understand that. Secondly, reducing the amount of energy we consume. Insulating homes means less energy needed to both heat and cool homes. Do with some cooling in here right now. UK homes are stunningly badly insulated compared to other countries. There are some other measures as well. Cancelling the tax relief for fossil fuel companies. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Companies that make huge profits don't need tax breaks. Companies that produce things we'd rather not have shouldn't get tax breaks. Like, the purpose of a tax break is it's for companies who produce things that we wish to encourage, that we think are good for society, but they don't have a reliable business model to do so fully commercially. You know, say tax breaks for companies putting solar panels on roofs, like with the last Labour government, or wind turbines in remote locations. Well, that's beneficial. So you can see how it's not necessarily until you've built it up commercially viable. So yeah, sure, tax relief, because we'd like to encourage that. Of course, the government could just manage the whole thing itself and not use private companies. But if they're going to use private companies, yeah, tax relief is something that's of benefit to society, sure. Tax relief to those who make profits without the need for state support? No. And tax relief for those who are literally destroying the environment that we need to survive in future generations? I don't think so. The plan also stops people on prepayment meters having to pay more. Now, this has been a scandal for some time. So obviously it tends to be people in poverty who have prepayment meters. Generally speaking, if someone falls behind with their payments, the solution for the energy companies is, right, we're going to give you a prepayment meter. So it tends to be poorer houses that have prepayment meters. So making them pay more for each unit of energy than those on higher income, that's just obscene. There's no justification for that. So in terms of where this leaves us, like I say, the plan will never be put into effect. So people need to stop focusing on, is this the best thing for where the country is right now? Labour are not in government, nor are they going to be as this crisis unfolds. So it needs to make sense to target voters. This is a political plan. And it needs to be something that experts say simply can't work. So although I say it's a political plan, it has to credibly work still, because the Tory media are not going to cover up for it. If they can find, serious experts that say, no, this won't work at all, then that's no good. The Tories will insist that it won't work, of course. But will they have independent experts to back them up? Now, there may be some experts that say more could be done. I've already seen economists saying, oh, actually, my plan would be better. And it's like, it may well be, but it doesn't matter. What matters is which plan is best for ordinary people. Labour's or the Conservatives, because that's the choice. And Labour should play the benefits of being opposition. Just like Nigel Farage can talk a load of crap about how his version of Brexit would have been brilliant, because it'll never be put to the test. He can claim all sorts of ridiculous things. Labour should play this card as well. You know, there are always going to be pros and cons to any plan that deals with any crisis. A crisis is always monumentally bad, and the solutions to deal with it are never perfect. But Labour need to point out the following benefits of their plan heavily. They've already pointed these out, but these are the ones that you need to point out heavily to the public. One, it means energy bills don't actually go up any higher. Oh, you're worried about the energy prices increase in October? Our plan means they don't. Two, it means the people who pay for the crisis, because there is a crisis, we can't ignore it, are the extremely wealthy corporations that, by the way, are poisoning our atmosphere. Three, that it will lower inflation from our current forecast. That will reduce the chances of a collapse in our currency. Four, if the insulation scheme is adopted, it means less energy needed in future years to maintain the temperature in the home, so your bills will actually come down because you won't have to spend as much. And this applies in both hot and cold weather. And the reason I would plug these ones most of all is because they're the ones the government will not adopt. You know, they'll have to do something, and what they have to do may well encroach on some of Labour's plan, and Labour need to point out that all they'll be doing is a weaker version of their own plan. That it still squeezes the budgets of ordinary people to feed corporate profits, that it does nothing to prepare for future energy insecurity. But it's been announced now, Labour have a good 3 weeks to push this while the Tories sit on their hands. Once the new Prime Minister is appointed, voters will hopefully be more familiar with what Labour are promising and will look to the actual government to see what they're going to do. The pressure will then be on the Tories. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'm going to do like Boris Johnson and find a fridge to hide in.